The cold that night was the kind that sank into the bones. Not the sharp cold that came with snowstorms and chaos, but a quiet, heavy cold that wrapped itself around the town and made everything feel slower and lonelier. The streets were almost empty, lined with dark houses where most people were already asleep. Streetlights gave off a weak yellow glow, and the wind pushed old paper and dry leaves across the road. The drive home felt longer than usual. The heater in the car worked, but it could not fully keep the chill away. The person behind the wheel kept their hands tight on the steering wheel, more out of habit than need. Life had been heavy lately. Bills stacked up faster than paychecks. Sleep came late and went early. Days blended together, each one feeling like it took more energy than the last. It had been one of those days that ended without any clear win. Work was draining. Conversations felt forced. Even small things felt like effort. All that was wanted now was home. A warm drink. Silence. Maybe sleep. If luck allowed, the road curved near an old stretch that connected the town to the highway. It was not a dangerous area. It's quiet and poorly lit. Most people avoided it late at night simply because there was nothing there. As the car slowed near the bend, the headlights caught something strange. Motorcycles, several of them. They were pulled off to the side of the road, evenly parked, some tilted on their stands. A few figures stood nearby, shadows moving slowly. Leather jackets, helmets resting on seats. Large bikes that looked heavy and loud, even while standing still. The foot tightened slightly on the brake. 1,000 thoughts rushed in at once. This is not my problem. I should not stop here. It's late. It's cold. What if something goes wrong? Stories the person had heard over the years, surfaced without being invited. Stereotypes. Rumors passed from one mouth to another. Warnings given by people who claimed to be just looking out. None of those stories had ever been proven, but fear rarely waits for proof. The car slowed more. A glance in the side mirror showed no other vehicles. The road behind was empty. The road ahead was empty too. One of the bikers looked up as the car approached. Just a quick look. No wave, no signal to stop. Just awareness. The car rolled a little farther. Before coming to a complete stop, the engine stayed on. The inside of the car felt suddenly small. Safe, but small. Like a bubble separating one world from another. The hand rested on the gear shift, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The bikers went on talking among themselves. Their voices were carried away by the wind, words unclear. One of them rubbed their hands together, his breath visible in the air. That's when the cold really hit. The heater had been running for nearly the whole drive. But the thought of standing outside in that temperature made the person wince. Whoever those bikers were, they were out there with no shelter, no warmth, no passing traffic. The brave part of the mind whispered quietly, "What if they need help?" The fearful part answered louder, "What if they don't?" The car door stayed closed. The clock on the dashboard showed it was well past midnight. Not early enough for night shift workers. Not late enough to explain being stranded alone like this. The car crept forward a few feet, then stopped again. Finally, a decision formed, not bold, not heroic. Just human. The window rolled down halfway. Cold air rushed in instantly, sharp and biting. The noise from outside was clearer now. Boots crunching lightly on gravel. A low cough. The sound of metal cooling. One of the bikers stepped slightly closer, but kept a respectful distance. "Everything okay?" the person asked from inside the car. The voice sounded calmer than expected. The biker nodded once. "Bike won't start. Been trying for a while. No anger, no threat. Just tiredness." "How long you been out here?" the person asked. "Too long," the biker replied with a small, humorless smile. That smile changed something. The car door opened. The cold rushed in fully now, wrapping around legs and arms like it had been waiting. The ground felt hard underfoot. The wind cut across the road without mercy. Up close, the bikers looked different from what the imagination had painted. Yes, they were big. Yes, They wore leather and heavy boots. But they also looked human. Cold red faces, dry lips, tired eyes. There were more of them than first noticed. 5 in total. One bike had its seat lifted. Tools were laid out on a cloth beside it. The metal looked stiff with cold. "Anyone coming for you?" the person asked. "No signal out here," one of them replied. "Tried calling earlier." The words hung in the air. No signal. Cold night. Broken bike. The silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. "I've got a phone charger and a thermos," the person said finally. "It's not much." One of the bikers looked genuinely surprised. "That would help." Back at the car, the thermos was handed over. Steam rose when the lid was opened, thin but clear. The smell was simple, nothing fancy, but it felt like comfort in liquid form. "Thanks," someone muttered. Another nodded. The person leaned back against the car, arms crossed, teeth almost chattering now. Funny how concern for others made it easy to forget personal discomfort. Time passed in small moments. A few jokes were shared. Dry humor, the kind that comes from people used to long roads and broken plans. One biker explained the problem. Another tried again to restart the engine. It failed with a dull sound. Still, no tension, just people sharing the same cold air. At some point, the person checked the phone. Still had service, barely. "I can call roadside help," the person offered. "Might take a while." "That'd be huge," one of them said. While waiting on hold, the wind picked up, howling through the open stretch. The bikers stood closer together now, sharing warmth without comment. The person noticed small details. A patch sewn onto a jacket, worn but carefully kept. Scratches on the bikes that told stories of long rides. Hands that looked rough but steady. None of them showed impatience. None complained. When the call ended, the person explained help was on the way, though it could be slow. "That's better than nothing," one biker replied. "You didn't have to stop, you know," the person shrugged. "Someone once stopped for me. A long time ago." That was true, though the memory had almost faded. A stranger who had offered help without asking for anything. At the time, it had mattered more than words could say. Minutes turned into longer minutes. The cold became a dull ache rather than sharp pain. Finally, headlights appeared in the distance. Relief settled over the group. Quiet, but clear. As the service vehicle pulled closer, the bikers began packing up their tools. One of them walked over to the person by the car. "You didn't just help us," the biker said slowly. "You reminded us something." The person wasn't sure what to say, so said nothing. Hands were shaken. Simple, firm. The bikers mounted their bikes once the problem was handled enough to get them moving again. Engines roared to life, loud and powerful against the silent night, before riding off. One biker raised a hand in a short wave. The road was quiet again. Almost instantly, the person stood there for a few seconds longer, breathing in cold air, heart beating a little faster than before. Then the car door closed, the heater clicked on, and warmth returned. As the drive home continued, something felt different. The problems were still there. Bills still unpaid. Stress still waiting. But inside, something lighter had taken place. One cold night. One simple choice, and no idea yet what it would lead to. The days after that cold night moved on the way life always did. Slow and busy at the same time. Morning came too early. Alarms rang. Coffee cooled before it could be finished. Work demanded focus even when the mind wanted to drift elsewhere. On the surface, nothing had changed. But underneath, something stayed awake. The memory of that night returned often. Sometimes while sitting in traffic. Sometimes while staring at a blank screen at work. The sound of engines starting up echoed in the mind like a distant thunder. Not loud, not scary, just present. It was strange how such a short moment could take up so much space at work. People talked about normal things. Weekend plans. Weather complaints. Small frustrations. The person listened, nodded, smiled at the right times. But there was a quiet feeling that something unseen had connected on that road. Something bigger than casual talk. That feeling came with questions. Who were those bikers really? Where were they headed that night? Did they make it home safely? There were no answers, and yet the curiosity didn't feel restless. It felt calm. That week felt colder than usual, even during the day. The wind cut through coats, and clouds hung low in the sky like they had nowhere else to be. People kept their heads down as they walked, hands tucked deep into pockets. One evening, while standing in line at a small store, the person noticed a biker helmet resting on the counter. It was scratched and faded from use. For a brief second, the heart lifted, thinking it might be one of them. But when the owner turned around, it was a stranger. Still, that small connection was enough to stir the memory again. At home, the quiet felt different too. The apartment was small, but it had always been enough. A couch that sank in the middle. A table with one uneven leg. A window that looked out at another building, too close for privacy. Normally, the silence there felt heavy. But that night, sitting on the couch with a warm drink, the silence felt thoughtful instead. The thought came slowly but clearly. Helping them felt right, not brave, not special, just right. That realization stayed longer than expected. A few days later, while heading home from work again, the same road came into view. The quiet stretch near the highway looked harmless in daylight. Cars passed without slowing. The place where the bikers had stood now looked empty and ordinary. Still, the person's eyes searched the shoulder of the road. Half expecting to see leather jackets and parked bikes again, nothing. Life continued. The following weekend, snow flurries dusted the town. Not enough to cover everything, just enough to make roads slick and people cautious. The person spent most of Saturday indoors, catching up on small chores that had been pushed aside for weeks. Laundry piled up. Dishes clinked in the sink. Music played softly in the background. That's when the knock came. It was late afternoon. Not unusual for deliveries, but there was no order expected. The knock was firm, but not aggressive. Just two simple knocks. The person hesitated before opening the door. Outside stood two figures, leather jackets, boots. Familiar build. The heart jumped so hard, it felt like it skipped a beat up close. They looked warmer than last time. Scarves wrapped around their necks. Gloves tucked into pockets. Their faces were more relaxed now, not tight with cold. "Hope we didn't freak you out," one of them said, smiling. The person laughed before realizing it. "No, I just didn't expect." "Yeah," the biker replied, nodding. "We figured." He stood there awkwardly for a second, like guests unsure if they were welcome. "We just wanted to talk," the other biker said. "If that's okay." The door opened wider. They stepped inside, boots planted carefully, as if afraid to bring the outside cold with them. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, but not uncomfortable. They sat at the table. Coats were taken off and laid over chairs. Steam rose from cups as fresh coffee was poured. For a minute, no one spoke. Then one biker leaned back and exhaled. "That night tit stuck with us." The person listened. "We're used to people avoiding us," the biker continued, crossing the street. "Locking doors, you know." The person nodded slowly. "Most nights we don't mind," the biker said. "But that one, cold like that. No cars passing. It hit different." The other biker looked down at the mug in their hands. "We were pretty much ready to settle in and wait it out. Not great thoughts running through the head." "Then your car stopped," the first biker said. "And we thought, great. Now someone's going to call the cops or give us trouble." They laughed lightly, but you didn't. The room felt warmer as the story unfolded. They talked about long rides taken together over the years. About breakdowns that left them stranded before. About how that night the cold seemed personal, like it was trying to test patience. The person shared pieces of their own life. Nothing dramatic. Just honesty. How stopping hadn't been planned. How fear had fought kindness inside the car. How the decision to roll down the window had been harder than expected. "That's the thing," one biker said quietly. "Courage isn't loud. It's just doing the thing you almost don't." The words stayed in the air. They didn't stay long. Just enough to finish coffee, share smiles, and exchange a few more thank-yous as they stood to leave. One of them paused at the door. "We ride back through this area sometimes," the biker said. "If you ever need anything at all, you won't be ignored." It wasn't a promise that felt heavy or serious. It felt sincere. When the door closed behind them, the apartment returned to its quiet state. But it no longer felt empty. Days turned into weeks. Winter pressed on, stubborn and gray. Work stayed busy. Money worries lingered. Some nights were still heavy, but something small had changed inside, a feeling that help could come from unexpected places, and that giving help didn't weaken a person. Then life threw another test. One evening, while driving home late again, the car shuddered. A light blinked on the dashboard. The engine sounded wrong. Not broken beyond repair, but unhappy. The person slowed, his heart sinking. The car barely made it into a nearby lot before giving up completely. The cold was back, not as sharp as before, but enough to bite. The hood was lifted. Steam rose lightly. The person stared at the engine, though knowing very little about what was wrong. A phone call was made, then another. No quick solutions. The lot was mostly empty. One broken streetlight flickered. The town felt silent again. For a moment, helplessness crept in. Then headlights appeared. Motorcycles, more than two, they pulled in slowly. Engines humming low. The person didn't feel fear this time. The bikes stopped nearby. Helmets came off. "Well," one of the bikers said with a grin, "looks like the road remembered you." Laughter broke the cold. They didn't hesitate. Jackets were passed over shoulders. Someone checked the engine. Another called for help with better tools. Someone else stood nearby, making sure the person stayed warm. No questions asked. No expectations, just presence as they waited. Snow began to fall again, light and steady. The group stood together, small clouds of breath rising into the night sky. The roles had reversed. But the feeling was the same connection. Not all help came with gratitude speeches or big gestures. Sometimes it came quietly, with headlights in the dark and people who remembered kindness when it mattered. That night, as the car was finally towed and plans were made, the person realized something important. That cold night on the road wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. And something told them. The story wasn't finished yet. After that night in the parking lot, life did not suddenly turn perfect. There were no miracles, no quick fixes. The cold still lingered. Problems still showed up every morning like unpaid guests. But something subtle had shifted, the kind of change that did not announce itself out loud. The car was in the shop for days. Each call from the mechanic brought mixed feelings, relief that it was fixable, worry about the cost. Money was already tight. Every number mattered. Every unexpected charge felt like a punch to the stomach. The bikers checked in once, by message, just to make sure everything was okay. Nothing dramatic. Just a short note asking if the car situation was handled. That small action meant more than they probably realized. Work stayed the same. Long hours. Quiet pressure. Smiles that felt practiced. Some days were easier than others. On the harder days, the person caught themselves thinking about that roadside help. About standing in the cold, not feeling alone. About strangers who didn't treat kindness like a burden. It changed how the world looked. Little things stood out more now. A cashier who smiled even when tired. A stranger holding the door a second longer. Someone giving directions without being asked, it felt like. Noticing a language that had always existed but had been ignored. One evening, while walking home with grocery bags cutting into fingers, the person saw a man struggling with a flat tire nearby. Cars passed without slowing, tires hissing against damp pavement. For a second, there was hesitation. Then, without thinking too much, the person walked over. "I'm not very good with cars," the person said honestly, "but I can call someone or help however I can." The man looked up, surprised. "Honestly, just someone stopping helps." They waited together until help arrived. They didn't exchange names. They didn't become friends. But they shared a moment, a small echo of something meaningful. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the person realized something strange. Fear hadn't disappeared, but it no longer decided. Everything winter pressed on harder in the weeks that followed. Snow came heavier. Roads turned slick. Power flickered off once during a storm and didn't return for hours, wrapped in blankets. The person sat by the window watching streetlights glow weakly through thick falling snow. The phone buzzed. A message. One of the bikers again. They were riding through nearby earlier than expected, heading back from a longer trip. One bike hadn't handled the weather well. Nothing serious, they said. Just frustrating. The person typed back, asking if they were okay. The response was fast. All good? Just tired, that was all. And yet, that short exchange carried warmth. It was funny how connection didn't need constant talking. Sometimes it existed quietly, waiting in the background. As days passed, something else became clear. Not all people reacted kindly to the idea of bikers coming around. A coworker spotted a leather jacket in a photo on the person's desk and made a joke that landed wrong. "Careful with that crowd," the coworker said, laughing. "You never know." The person laughed politely but felt something tighten inside. "They're just people," the person said. Calmly, the coworker shrugged, already moving on, but it stayed that night. The person thought about how easy it was to judge from a distance. How often fear was passed along without thought. The bikers hadn't asked to be defended. They probably didn't care. But the truth still mattered. Not everything that looks dangerous is bad. Not everything that feels unfamiliar is wrong. A few days later, the car was finally ready. The bill hurt, but it was manageable. Walking out of the shop, keys in hand, felt like winning a small battle. As the engine turned over smoothly, relief washed in waves. On the drive home, music played softly. Traffic moved slow but steady. Snow piles lined the streets like tired walls. At a red light, the person noticed a bike in the next lane. Just one. The rider nodded slightly. A simple gesture, the light changed. They rode on. That night, while eating dinner alone, the person thought about how life didn't offer many moments that clearly changed direction. Most shifts happened slowly, quietly, built from small choices stacked on top of each other. Stopping that night had been one of those choices. Saying yes instead of driving away. Weeks passed without much contact from the bikers. Not because anything was wrong, but because lives kept moving. Rides continued. Work continued. Weather softened just enough to remind people that spring existed somewhere down the line. Still, signs kept appearing. A low engine sound passing by in the distance. A familiar silhouette at an intersection. A wave recognizing a wave. Nothing dramatic, just steadiness. One evening, an envelope appeared under the apartment door. No name on the front. Just the address inside was a handwritten note. Short, clean, to the point. It said, "Thank you again." It said how much that night had mattered more than they admitted. It said kindness travels farther than people think. At the bottom of the note was a small symbol drawn in pen. Nothing official. Just something personal. The person folded the note carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as proof as a reminder. Then came the call no one expects to get. A family member had fallen sick. Not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to bring worry crashing back in. Hospital visits. Long waits. The smell of disinfectant. Doctors using words that felt both calming and terrifying at the same time. Stress returned full force. Sleep became shallow again. Thoughts spun in circles. Old fears resurfaced, easily now that emotional strength was stretched thin. One late night. Driving back from the hospital, exhaustion hit hard. The road blurred slightly, light streaking longer than usual. The person pulled over just to breathe, sitting their hands on the wheel, the weight of everything pressed down bills. Work, family, the future. The phone buzzed again. Another message. No emergency. No request. Just a check-in. A simple "how are you holding up?" The person stared at the screen longer than needed, then typed the truth. "I'm tired." The reply came quick. "Yeah, we get that. You don't have to explain." That was enough. No advice. No fixing, just understanding they didn't meet that night. No engines showed up. No dramatic rescue. And that was fine. The comfort came just from knowing someone remembered. Someone cared enough to reach out without needing a reason. Spring finally started pushing winter aside. Snow melted into dirty water along streets. Trees showed small signs of life. People smiled more easily. The family situation slowly improved. Hospital visits became shorter. Worry loosened its grip just a bit. One afternoon, while walking through a local market, the person heard familiar laughter. Turning around, they spotted a few of the bikers standing near a food stand. Helmets. Underarms. Recognition hit instantly. Conversation flowed easily now, without awkward pauses or guarded looks. They talked about the road, about weather, about nothing important at all. Before leaving, one of them said something quietly. "You remind us why we still do this. Ride together. Look out for each other." The person shook their head lightly. "You did that for me?" They smiled as they went their separate ways. The person felt something settle deep. Inside, this wasn't a story about bikers saving. It wasn't about a person being brave. It was about how one moment of kindness could grow roots when it landed in the right place. How trust could build slowly without force. How people could carry each other through seasons without even realizing it. Driving home that day, windows down, warmer air rushing in, the person smiled to themselves. Whatever came next, good or bad, this connection had already changed something important, and somewhere ahead on the road, something was quietly preparing to come full circle. The weeks after that meeting at the market felt calmer on the surface, but there was an unusual tension underneath, like the quiet before a storm that no one could predict. Life had settled into a routine again. Work, home, hospital visits that slowly became less frequent. Spring moved forward, brushing color back into the world. Trees grew heavier with leaves. Sidewalks filled with people again. The person felt grateful for the calm, yet a strange feeling lingered. A sense that something was unfinished. Not in a worrying way, just unfinished. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a utility company. It wasn't unexpected, but it still made the chest tighten. A past due notice. A reminder that balance didn't mean safety. One misstep could still cause a fall. The person sat at the table reading it slowly. Numbers stared back without caring how tired someone felt. The room was quiet except for the clock on the wall, ticking steady and loud. Solutions ran through the mind. None of them were easy. That night, sleep came late. The ceiling above the bed looked unfamiliar in the dark, like a place that no longer offered rest. Thoughts moved in circles. What if things slid backward again? What if effort wasn't enough? When morning finally came, the person felt drained before the day even began. Work was heavier than usual. Mistakes were made. Small ones, but noticeable. A manager pulled them aside, voice not angry, just careful. "You doing all right?" the manager asked. The person nodded. "Just a rough week. Try to hang in there," the manager said. "We need steady focus right now." It wasn't a threat, but it felt like a warning. After work, instead of going straight home, the person sat in the car for a long time. Music played softly, then was turned off. Silence filled the space again. That's when the sound appeared. At first, it was distant. Low, deep, almost familiar engines. The person looked up at the end of the street. Lights moved slowly closer. One by one, motorcycles turned into the road. Not rushing, not loud, controlled, intentional. The heart began to beat faster. 5 bikes. Then more. They rode in an easy line, spreading out enough not to block traffic. Neighbors glanced from windows. A few people stepped outside onto porches, curious. The bikes stopped nearby. Engines shut off one after another. leaving a strange quiet behind them. The person stepped out of the car without thinking. Helmets came off. Jackets shifted. Familiar faces appeared, calmer than ever. One of them raised a hand in a small wave. Another smiled. "We told you we'd be back through here," someone said. The person laughed softly, disbelief mixed with warmth. "I didn't think you meant like this." "We didn't either," one biker replied. Plans change. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, like people making sure they were standing in the right place. More neighbors had gathered now, watching from a distance. There was no tension from the bikers, no sharp movements. They kept their voices calm, their posture open. It felt like a quiet meeting, not a display. The person invited them inside again. This time, no awkwardness followed. Chairs were pulled close. Someone joked about how small the table looked with so many cups on it. Laughter filled the apartment in a way it hadn't before. They talked about the winter finally breaking, about roads opening up, about work that came and went. Nothing heavy at first, just reconnecting. Then one biker leaned forward, resting arms on knees. "We heard through a mutual contact that things have been a bit tight for you," the biker said carefully. "Didn't want to push, just wanted to check." Person blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't tell anyone outside we know," the biker said gently. "Word travels sometimes, not the details. Just the feeling." Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable one, a respectful one. The person looked down at their hands. "I'm managing," they said. "Just tired, that's all." "You remember that feeling," another biker said. "Most of us have worn it for years. No pity. No judgment, just understanding." One of them reached into a jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It's thin but heavy with intention. It was placed on the table and gently pushed forward. "No pressure," the biker said. "You don't even have to open it now." The person hesitated. Hands shook slightly. "What is this?" "They asked to thank you," came the reply. "For seeing us as people on a cold night when it would have been easier not to." The envelope stayed untouched for a long second. Then it was opened. Inside was a folded note and something else. A stack of neatly arranged bills. Not money that felt careless or flashy. Money collected with purpose. The room went quiet. "I can't," the person began, voice catching. "You can," one biker said calmly, "and you will. And one day, when you're steady, you'll pass it on. That's how this works." Tears filled the person's eyes before they could be held back. Not loud sobs. Just quiet, honest tears. "No one is asking you to owe us," another added. "This isn't a loan. It's a bridge." The weight of the moment pressed down in a way words couldn't hold. This wasn't charity. It wasn't rescue. It was community built without planning. Neighbors outside watched the bikes. But none of them saw what truly happened inside that room. They didn't see relief break through fear. They didn't hear the cracking voice whispering, "Thank you," again and again. They didn't feel the release of knowing the next few steps wouldn't be taken. Alone, the bikers didn't stay long after that. They never stayed long. Goodbyes were made with nods and short embraces. Promises were simple. "We'll check on you. We always do." When the door closed behind them, the apartment seemed brighter. Not because of money, because of dignity preserved. That evening, the person sat alone again at the table, envelope beside a cup of cooling tea. Thoughts felt clearer. The utility notice lay folded neatly now. It's no longer screaming for attention. Later that night, engines echoed again as the bikers rode away in formation. The sound faded into distance, leaving calm behind. But the calm felt different now, heavier with meaning. The next day at work, focus returned. Tasks were handled one by one, patiently. The manager noticed. A nod was given. Small wins stacked together quietly over the next few days. The person paid the bill, caught up where needed, and set aside a small plan for the future. Not perfect, just steady. Every now and then, the phone buzzed with a message. A quick check-in, a joke, a photo from the road. Nothing excessive connection, didn't need noise. One evening, While walking home, the person noticed someone else stop by the roadside. A car overheated. A family inside looked stressed. Without hesitation, the person slowed and stopped. "Everything okay?" they asked, and just like that, the circle widened again, somewhere far down the road. Motorcycles rolled under an open sky, unaware of how their kindness continued to move forward. Or maybe they knew and trusted it enough not to watch. Either way, the brave decision made on one cold night had turned with full force, not as thunder, as something stronger, belonging. The weeks that followed felt lighter, even though life itself had not suddenly become easy. The bills were managed, not erased. Work was steadier, not perfect. Worry still showed up from time to time. But something important had changed at the core. The person no longer felt invisible. Each morning now began with a small routine. Coffee brewed slowly. The window was opened a little to let fresh air in. Some days birds could be heard. Other days only traffic. But waking up didn't feel as heavy as before. There was a sense of grounding. It's like both feet were finally on the floor. The envelope from that day was no longer at the center of thought. It had served its purpose and was now just part of the story, not the focus of it. What stayed was the feeling behind it, the reminder that kindness could show up loud or quiet, sometimes right when it was needed most. Work improved in ways that didn't draw attention. Focus sharpened. Tasks finished faster. Confidence returned in small pieces. A position opened up one afternoon. Nothing major, but a step forward. The manager mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought. "You've been solid lately," the manager said. "If you're interested, let me know." The person nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to say yes. Outside of work, habits shifted too. Walks became longer. Meals became more thoughtful. Music returned to evenings instead of silence. Small plans were made for the future, not big dreams. It's just reachable steps. Connections stayed steady. The bikers checked in now and then, never overstepping. Sometimes it was a photo of an open road. Sometimes a message about weather ahead. Sometimes just a quick "hope you're good." And the person always was, in some way. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, the handwritten note resurfaced. The ink had faded slightly, creases marking where it had been folded and unfolded. Reading it again brought a quiet smile. It wasn't the words that mattered most anymore. It was what followed them. Spring leaned fully into summer. The town changed moods with the season. People stayed out later. Laughter floated through open windows at night. The air smelled warmer, fuller. On a calm evening, the person drove along that same stretch of road where it had all begun. The highway hummed steadily, cars moving without urgency. The bend where the bikes once stood looked smaller now, less dramatic in daylight. The car slowed, not out of fear, out of respect. Memories played softly, like background noise. Cold air, steam from breath, a shaking hand on a car door handle, a decision made before the mind could talk its way out of it. The person smiled. Farther down the road, his motorcycle passed, rider lifting a hand in a brief wave. The person waved back. Some things didn't need words. Later that week, a community event took place at a local park. Nothing fancy. Food trucks. Folding chairs. Music played through borrowed speakers. People gathered because it felt good to be around others. After long months of keeping to themselves, the person walked through the crowd slowly, enjoying the unfamiliar comfort of belonging anywhere without trying. And then they heard it. Engines. This time, no nerves. No surprise, the bikers rolled in easy and relaxed, parking respectfully on the edge of the lot. Helmets came off. Smiles were shared. A few people stared, curious. Others barely noticed. They joined the crowd like anyone else. Someone handed out food. Someone else told a story about a wrong turn taken miles back. Laughter followed naturally. At one point, a child from the neighborhood stood near one of the bikes, eyes wide. One biker crouched down, explaining how the engine worked, careful and patient. The child listened, like it was magic. The person watched from a distance. Heart full. This was the version of the world rarely shown, the one where people were bigger than labels, softer than assumptions. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with fading light, one of the bikers stood beside the person. "Funny how things work," the biker said. "It is," the person replied. "If you'd kept driving that night." The biker added. The person didn't answer right away. "I think about that sometimes." The biker nodded. "We all do. But you didn't. That's the part that matters." A deep breath filled the space between them. No more needed to be said. As the event wound down, hugs were exchanged. Promises were made without pressure. When the bikes pulled away, the sound felt familiar now, not sharp or startling. Just part of the world moving. That night, lying in bed, the person reflected on how easily life could have gone differently. Not harder. Just emptier. What if fear had won that first moment? What if kindness had stayed locked behind glass and steel? The answers didn't bring regret. They brought clarity. Everyone carries moments like that. Small choices with big shadows. They don't announce themselves. They don't glow or flash. They just sit quietly, waiting. In the weeks that followed, the person became someone who stopped more often. Not blindly, not dangerously, just aware. A neighbor bringing in heavy groceries, a coworker struggling silently, a stranger looking lost. Help didn't always change outcomes, but it always changed connection. One evening, sitting alone again with a warm drink, the person felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Peace, not the loud kind. The lasting kind. Life would still surprise, still test, still demand strength. But now, strength felt shared, not carried alone, somewhere on a long open road. Motorcycles cut through the night air, steady and sure. Somewhere else, a person slept easier than they used to, and all of it traced back to one cold night. One pause. One brave decision that wasn't brave because it was fearless, but because it was human. The bikers returned. Yes, but in truth, what returned was something even greater: trust. And once trust finds its way back, it never really leaves. The story should have ended there. Everyone said it felt complete. The bills were handled. The fear had softened. Trust had found its place. Life was moving forward again. But life rarely ends stories when people think it should. It adds one more chapter. Quiet at first, summer faded into early fall. The kind of season where mornings felt cool, but afternoons still held warmth. Leaves began to change slowly, one tree at a time, like they needed permission before letting go. The town moved at an easier pace now. Kids returned to school. Traffic grew thicker in the evenings. Work responsibilities increased too. The new role came with longer hours and more pressure, but also a sense of purpose. For once, pressure didn't feel like punishment. It felt like trust. Some nights were still exhausting. The person came home with shoulders tight and thoughts buzzing. But instead of collapsing into worry, they started doing something new. They reached out. Sometimes it was a neighbor. Sometimes a coworker. Sometimes one of the bikers. Just to talk. Just to remind themselves that silence didn't have to be heavy. That habit saved more energy than sleep ever had. One evening, storm rolled in without warning, the kind that darkened the sky fast and cracked the air open with thunder. Rain hit the ground hard, loud enough to drown out everything else. Power flickered, but stayed on. The person stood by the window watching water flood the street. Thinking about how quickly things could turn, the phone rang. It was late. The number wasn't saved, but it looked familiar. "Hey," a familiar voice said on the other end. "Didn't mean to call so late. It's okay," the person said, already sitting down. "What's going on?" "One of our own went down," the voice said. Calm but serious. Nothing life-threatening. Bikes skidded on wet pavement. Took a fall. The person's chest tightened. "Are they okay?" "Yeah, bruised, shaken up. But the bike stuck out near the old service road. Tow trucks aren't moving much tonight." There was a pause. "We could use a dry place to regroup," the voice added. No pressure. Just thought I'd ask. The answer came without hesitation. Come here. They arrived soaked and tired, jackets darkened by rain. The apartment filled with the smell of wet leather and rain-soaked asphalt. Towels were passed around. Warm drinks followed. No one complained. No one dramatized the night. The biker who had fallen sat quietly at the table, hands wrapped around a cup. Staring at nothing, the person sat across from them. Days like this mess with the head, the biker said quietly. I know, the person replied. But you're here. That counts. The biker nodded. They stayed until the storm eased, until roads became safer. Before leaving, the biker who had fallen stood up slowly and looked around the room. Funny, they said. We're usually the ones riding off into the night. Didn't expect to land somewhere like this. The person smiled. Neither did I the first time. Right. When they left. Rain still dripped from the sky, but the street felt calmer again that night. Sleep came easily. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. People began to talk. Not in a bad way. Neighbors who had once only nodded now stopped to chat. Someone mentioned seeing the bikes a few times. Always respectful, always calm. A rumor spread that they had helped jumpstart cars during a blackout. Another, that they escorted a scared driver home late one night. Stories stacked up. Quiet but steady. The labels slowly lost power. One weekend, the person was invited to a long group ride out of town. Nothing risky. Nothing wild. Just open roads and fresh air. They hesitated at first. Fear didn't disappear all at once. It loosened its grip slowly. It's like fingers releasing a wrist after holding too tight. But yes, felt right. The ride was peaceful. Engines steady. Wind cool against the skin. Fields stretched wide and endless. There was space to breathe. Space to think. At one stop. Far from town. The person stood looking out over the land. Feeling something deep and simple. Gratitude, not for the bikes, not for the money, not even for the help. For connection. On the way back, dusk painted the sky in soft colors. The group rode slower then, not because they had to, but because no one wanted to rush the moment. When they returned to town, hugs were shared. No speeches. Just understanding. Days later, an unexpected email arrived at work. A chance to transfer to another department. Better hours. Better balance. The work aligned with skills long ignored. It felt earned. On the drive home that evening, the person laughed out loud, alone in the car. Not from disbelief. From relief at home, they sat at the table where it had all come together months ago. The chair felt familiar. The room felt like a place that had held growth. Not struggle. The handwritten note was still there, folded neatly. Corners soft with time. The person wrote something on a new piece of paper. Just a few lines, Thank you. Not for saving anything. For showing what was possible. That note was tucked into a jacket pocket meant to be returned later. As fall deepened, the town prepared for colder days. Heaters clicked on again. Coats returned to closets near doors. The memory of that first freezing night felt far away now, but never forgotten. One cold evening, early snow dusted the ground. Not enough to stay. Just enough to remind. The person drove home slower than usual, near that old stretch of road. Headlights caught movement. A car pulled off to the side. Someone standing beside it. Arms folded tight against the cold. The car slowed. The brakes engaged. The person stopped. The window rolled down. Cold air rushing in. You okay? The person asked. The stranger looked up, surprised. I think so. Just won't start. The person smiled gently. You're not alone. As the door opened and feet touched the cold ground, the cycle continued not as fate, not as destiny, but as choice. Again and again. And somewhere out on the road, engines hummed under the night sky. Unaware that a story that helped begin was still being written, one simple decision at a time.